Okay, here we are. It is, again, Monday, April 5th, 2021. This is the Storytelling by and for Adults series. And the first storyteller of the evening is coming to us from near St. Louis, Missouri, USA. Missouri is the show me state. I remember that much because I'm from New York City. I'm from the USA. And we know Missouri is the show me state. If you don't have it in your hands and you can't show me, I don't believe it. Right? That's your motto there in Missouri. So Flavia Everman, please introduce yourself properly and please tell us a story.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Eric. This is, you're right, Zoom has been a nice blessing just because we have been able to meet people from all over the world, essentially. I know this has been difficult for me because I'm a people person. I'm one of those extrovert that's all the way on the other side. And so Zoom is okay, but boy, howdy, I want my live audience back. So I'm really looking forward to getting back. But it is nice in the meantime to meet so many of you, so many people from all over the world and get touch base with more storytellers because I'm Flavia Everman. I'm from outside of St. Louis, out in the country. So if you hear a chicken, or something. Anyway, I've been a professional storyteller for quite a while now. I'm a regional storyteller in the St. Louis Storytelling Festival, and I've done festivals and different shows and presentations like that. So I'd love to tell you a story, and it is Pavo and by Evaline Ness. Once upon a time in the kingdom far, far away, and where the trees were beautiful, and the towers and the castles were all nice, everything was green and gorgeous. Well, there lived a princess and her father, the king. The princess was very, very beautiful, but she was very nice. In fact, no one liked her. She did whatever she wanted to, whenever she wanted to, and however she wanted to. But the king loved her. But there was one thing that the princess did not do, and that is cry. You see, she had held her tears in all of these years, and she would not cry. The king loved her, but he was very worried about her. He was grieved at this situation, for everyone must learn to cry at the situations in the world. So every morning, he would take the princess out for a walk in the beautiful garden, and then they would wind their way around. And as they walked, he would speak about the lands outside of the castle walls. He would tell her about the joys and the happiness, but he was also tell her about the wars and the sorrow, hoping that that would prick her heart to help her to cry. But alas, princess did not cry. So on her 7th birthday, the king decided that he would give the princess a gift. He would give her Pavo, his favorite peacock. For he thought, if I could find something that the princess could love, something that the princess could feel attached to, perhaps she could learn to cry. And so the princess was delighted, for her very own, was Pavo the peacock. Well, the first thing she did was took a ribbon and she tied it around his neck and she hauled him all around the garden. Now, Pavo was the most gorgeous peacock in the herd, for he was pure white. His gossamer feathers shimmered in the light, and all the peacocks knew that they were not as good as Pavo. And so whenever Pavo would show his fan and shake his feathers, they would all slink away. But Pavo, he would proudly walk around with his peacock and his tail all fanned out, but not on this day. For this day, he was hauled around the garden by the princess with a string around his neck. And when the other peacocks saw what had happened, they laughed. And Pavo put his tail down and he felt very humiliated. Day after day, the princess hauled the Pavo around. But one morning when she woke up, she was angry. She took her pillows off the bed and she threw them on the floor. She plopped on the floor and she looked at the ceiling. And when she looked out the window, she saw Pavo. For you see, she was not going for a walk with the king this morning, nor would she go for a walk for the next month, for the king had gone out on an errand for a whole month. She was angry. But when she saw Pavo, it reminded her of the king. And she thought, ugh, ugh. So she leaned out the window, stuck her tongue out, crossed her eyes, and slammed the shutters closed. And she grabbed her ribbons, and she stomped out to the garden. And there she found Pavo, who had slunk off because he was sad too that the king was gone. And she found Pavo and she tied his feathers in bunches all over. And so when he put his fan of his tail up, it looked like a broken fan. Pavo was humiliated. And all the peacocks laughed. They laughed at Pavo, for he was the silliest looking peacock they had ever seen. Well, day after day, the princess came to Pavo, and she did one humiliating thing after another. Finally, Pavo could take it no more. He flew up into the highest tree and he wanted to cry, but he didn't. Instead, he looked over the castle wall and he knew what he had to do. Flew over the castle wall, out to the rocks and out to the sea, and disappeared. Well, the next morning, when the princess threw open the shutters and looked into the garden, she could not find Pavo anywhere. So she ran down to the garden and she looked 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 and she looked, but she could not find Pavo. She sat there angry. When she looked down on the ground, there was a ribbon, tattered and torn from the weather, that had been tied to his tail. And she remembered the time that she had tied all of those ribbons to Pavo's tail, making it look like a broken fan. And she wanted to laugh because it was so silly. But instead, 2 big tears rolled down her cheek. The more she looked at the ribbon, another tear rolled down her cheek, and another, and another, and another, and all the tears that she had never cried came spilling out of her eyes. Over and over they came. She wept and wept and wept. She wept until the king came home 2 weeks later. Of course, all the servants were beside themselves. There was the princess crying and crying and crying, and they couldn't stop it. She cried and cried and cried, and the king was overjoyed, for now she was crying. But then he was a little concerned. 2 weeks, he said, for 2 weeks she has been crying. So he took the little princess into his arms, and he held her tight, and he consoled her. And he says, honey, what is wrong? What is wrong? And she says, Pavo is gone, Daddy. Pavo is gone. It is all my fault. It's all my fault. Well, the king consoled the princess. And he says, we'll find him. We will find him. So that next day, he sent out all of the guardsmen out of the castle and all over the town looking for Pavo. But they couldn't find him. For you see, Pavo, he had flown back. Once the king had returned, he flew back to the tallest tree in the garden and watched everything. He watched as the soldiers went away. He watched as they came back in the evening. He watched the princess crying. He watched the king console the princess. He watched and watched and watched. Day after day, the guards went out. Day after day, they searched. Day after day, they came back empty-handed. And all this time, Pavo watched. And then the princess was crying so much that she became sick. She couldn't get out of her bed. She couldn't open her shutters and look for Pavo. She couldn't stick out her tongue or cross her eyes or shout mean things. Just lay in her bed, cried and cried and cried. And Pavo, that night, he looked at the closed shutters. He looked at the princess's dark room. He looked where the princess should have been. She was not. And Pavo too cried. And that sound was so loud, it went floating through the castle, through the hallways, into doorways, and into the princess's room. And the princess sat up. Pavo! Pavo! Pavo flew down to the yard, and all of the guardsmen and the people in the castle, they ran out. But the princess did too, and she ran with all of her little might, running and running through the halls, down the stairway, running, running, running out into the garden, running, running, running. And when she got to Pavo, she threw her arms around his neck and hugged him tight. Pavo, my dear Pavo, she said. And when the king came and he watched the scene and he saw Pavo's fan out in his gossamer glory, and there the princess said, Pavo, Pavo, can you please forgive me? Can you please forgive me for being so mean to you? Pavo gently shook his head, yes, and his little crown brushed her nose and tickled her nose, and she giggled. And then she threw her arms around him again, and he cuddled up against him, and he threw his fan out tall and wide to show how happy he was. There the king looked on, and he saw the people that he loved, the princess and his peacock, together in love. Well, from that time on, the princess and Pavo cried whenever they were sad, and sometimes they just cried for the sheer joy of it. And that is how the princess learned to cry and respect others. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you so very much. That was really beautifully done.
Thank you.
It seems the princess, at the beginning, she had a problem with she couldn't feel compassion, something like that, right?
I think so, you know, it's a story for adults, but if you look at, I mean, it's just a children's, I'm gonna say a children's story, but if you're right. I mean, so many people, especially this day and age, we have become so isolated, I think, with Zoom, and we've become so disconnected to touch and to humanity. And I think that's one thing that we must never, never lose track of, because we are people. You're not, you know, a stranger. You're not, you know, somebody else. We're all people, and we're all on this earth, and we all have to work together. And that compassion, we can't forget it just because, you know, we're separated by a Zoom or a computer.
I can tune into storytelling in India.
I'm sorry, somebody began to say something. But I'm wondering how was it that the turning point was when she saw the ribbon? That opened the floodgates, right? That sort of broke the spell. Why do you think that broke the spell? Anybody? Oh, Flavia, do you have a thought about that?
I do. I think sometimes, I mean, if you believe in a higher power, sometimes our God puts things in our path to remind us of the horrible things or the things that we need to change. And I think sometimes we can come across something in our lives that reminds us of something that we have done incorrectly, or a flaw in our character. And I think the ribbon was that reminder of I would say, a flaw in her character, but what she had used it to tie around his neck and to tie it together. And she realized that that was humiliating for her, and her hair was fine, but for a peacock, it was not. And I think those situations that come into our lives, I think sometimes remind us that we do have flaws in our character, but we can always fix them. And so that was really nice too, where she was able to fix that flaw in her character.
The a ribbon is usually there to accentuate beauty, you know, to make something even more beautiful. But she had used the ribbon to disturb the peacock. So maybe she finally felt guilty, or that she had missed opportunities, and that finally she'd driven the peacock away.
Yes.
Very mysterious. I've become familiar with an idea in psychology that many times in fairy tales, if a character is under a spell or has been cursed, it can be seen to represent an actual blockage in a character's personality, or in a human being's personality. And hold on, someone's ringing the bell. I'll be right back.
So thank you so much for your comments over here. Hopefully I can get them.
Flavia beautifully narrated. Do you know the source of the story?
It is actually a book. It's a book by here. I'll write it in the chat. It's a book by Evaline Ness. And I know Eric was going to see if we could publish it, or, post it on Facebook. And I'm going to ask him to wait, because I've been trying to get permission to tell this online or in public, but the author has passed away in 1986, and the publishing company is no longer around. So I've been trying to figure out how in the world to get a hold of the copyright to, but it was written in 1964, and it is Pavo and the.
I love the way you, took out the peacock's voice, the sounds of the peacock, and as well as, the red ribbon that left a mark. That was very impactful. Loved it.
Good.
I actually came in late. I came back cycling from my evening and we are very lucky, blessed in fact, to have to stay near the military forest area. And this is the summertime, and you can really see the peacocks. So it was such a blessing that I come back. I saw 2 peacocks, and then I've missed part of your story. So it's really, but your narration style was very, very soft, and I think I missed the peacock sounds from you.
Oh, now it was interesting because I don't have any peacocks, but I do a lot of like I do roosters and chickens. I do all kinds of different animal sounds. So I looked it up online, and someone even said that it sounded just like a peacock. So that was my key, or that was my hope, that it would sound just.
It's a meow sound.
Well, you did a great peacock, and we could tell that you've been on a farm.
Yes, I have guineas and chickens and dogs and cats, and I had cows, and I'm contemplating goats.
So as I was saying, there's this idea in when people think about fairy tales that when a character is cursed or there's a magic spell on a character, that can be seen to represent some sort of blockage or non-development in a person's personality. So in symbolic terms, how can the curse be lifted? In this case, the character herself saw that ribbon, which helped her break through. In other fairy tales, there has to be a long period of love and devotion and hard work. and then an uprising against the curse, but only because the long loving work has put in, the breaking of the curse is possible. Anyway, I've been thinking about how sometimes we get disconnected from ourselves, and we might lose the ability to cry. We might lose the ability to laugh. So somehow we have to reconnect. And this is represented so beautifully in this fairy tale. There's nothing new under the sun, right? People have been getting disconnected from themselves for a long time. Anybody else, any thoughts about the story or the way it was told? All right, well, Flavia, thank you so very, very much. And apologies, I had to go off to the door like that.
That's fine, because we were doing a little discussion here too about the peacock. So thank you all for your comments. Those were really, I have enjoyed, I don't know, just seeing some of you guys from India, and I don't know, it just makes the world a smaller place, and you realize that it's, you know, I have family all over the world, and I love it. I do a project in Africa, and I've done some, you know, Zooming with them too, and I miss traveling. My son asked me, he says, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do, Mom? And I said, I would go everywhere, and I would meet as many people as possible. And I think that's, you know, I think that's what it's all about, is being with each other and seeing each other and being humans with each other and just loving each other and caring. And so thank you all so much for your time. I have to run because I have to get to work because it's morning here.
Mm.
So, but
Great. Okay,
thank you all
thank you
for your attention.